Live. Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for the day. We pray that you'll bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today, I was a little bit busy this week, so, well, I'll never make a prediction on how long this may or may not be. So, so I'm going to call this Gaslight, Gaslighting, Gaslit, because I think this is what's happening in our world today. And there's a dictionary definition of gaslighting is psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories, and typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence, and self-esteem, certainly of one's emotional or mental stability, and a dependency on the perpetrator. And I think this is the world that we live in. I think this is what they're trying to do. There's also gaslight can also mean the active practice of grossly misleading someone, especially for one's own advantage. And does that sound like anything that's going on in our world today? And then there's of course, the present participle of gaslight is gaslighting, and then gaslit, it can also be a verb. So we see this happening, and I'll talk about it in just a moment. Again, this is this crazy world that we live in, but most of it's going to be centered on things that are happening in the Middle East. And we talk about acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding, all these different things that are happening. And all that is based on patterns in Scripture and that type of thing. We know that, for example, in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus says, when you see all these things, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. So it appears that there's going to be a lot of things happening. And there's a lot of things that Jesus makes reference to in there, and then there are other prophets that talk about it. We also know from the pattern of Scripture that there's an acceleration of things, that in Jewish prophecy, pattern is very important. And so they look at the pattern of what happened, let's say at the time of the birth of Christ. There were a lot of prophecies about the first coming of the Messiah. And those extended over Jesus' life, over his 33 and a half years that he lived here on the earth. And there were a lot of those prophecies were fulfilled, but about 60% of them were fulfilled in the last week before he ascended back to heaven. So if that's the pattern, the first coming pattern is the pattern for the second coming, we would expect this acceleration, convergence of prophecies near the time of the Lord's return. And I think that's where we are. I still like this. It's not the perfect graphic, but I keep thinking of a three-dimensional musical score. So you take out one slice and it gives you a little bit of the piece, but you might only get second violin from that part. But if you put all the slices together, you got this magnificent orchestral piece. And so we reference this passage a lot in Daniel chapter 12. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. And many shall be purified, made white, and refined. But the wicked shall do wickedly, but none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And it also says in Daniel 11 that they'll instruct many. So this is just my feeble attempt at trying to show how these things are all happening at the same time. This is just using the example of the four horsemen and the seals. And again, my view of the scroll is that one seal opens and part of the scroll unrolls, and then the next seal. And I think that's pretty tied into Scripture. So we'll look at some of the things that are going on, but in terms of gaslighting, this is a New York Post yesterday, communism. I think that's a pretty good thing about the promises that she's made about everybody. And so what you've seen, like even the New York Times, in a front page article this morning, alludes to the fact that the ascent of a VP quietly making her mark. And so what you're doing is you're having this complete makeover in front of us, and you're sort of being, not sort of, you're being gaslit about what's happening. this is not going to change. So the convention is this week. I'm sure you'll all be glued to your screens to watch what's going on in Chicago. And then you see, and again, the way you're gaslit, I mean, people, she's going to win Florida. That's the latest thing that I'm reading. She's going to win Florida. She's leading in Florida. She's tied in all these states. And we're still, 2.5 months till the election, 80 some days. I think that there's a lot of things that can change in the meantime. There could be a massive world war erupt in the meantime. So there's all sorts of things. Now, last week, this is another area where we get kind of gaslit. I talked a little bit about the bird flu summit. It's coming up in October. As best as I can tell from my research, the bird flu is not transmissible between humans, but that doesn't mean that there are people aren't trying to find out how it could be, doing that certain kind of research that they did with regard to a prior virus. And so there's a concern about this, and they're having this big, you should look at the agenda here. They're planning on how they control the narrative, how they do this, how they plan, how we even quarantine people and that sort of thing. But I don't know if the narrative is holding on this particular virus. This week, the World Health Organization came out and said that there's this new, it used to be called a different thing, but that was considered racist, I guess. It was called monkeypox. Now it's called mpox. And so they're saying, look at this, the World Health Organization issued a big warning about this is transmissible, and it's an emergency, it's a health emergency. And so it seems like we're sort of running in the same playbook that we ran in a few years back. And so the question a lot of people have, are we going to have an election in the United States? I had a graphic, but I didn't have time to put it in. A great graphic. I'll try to do a midweek this week if I have time. But there's a great graphic that shows it's like 64% of the world is having a major elections this year. And that's really unprecedented. There's also a great graphic that 50% of the world GDP comes from the coastal areas of China, United States, and one other place, a couple other places in the world. It's a very, very tiny part of the world that produces half of the world GDP. And it's kind of interesting that these are sort of the hot flashpoints of what's going on. And the tech industry is developing quickly. I want to make reference to this. This is a pretty good blog post by a guy named Stephen Whitlow. You can find it, just Google it, 4 Unintended Consequences of the Megachurch Movement and How to Solve Them. And this is a guy who followed the megachurch movement, who took his church through the megachurch movement, did all the things he was supposed to do, and now he says there were problems. Now, a lot of us have been talking about this for 20 years or more, about what would happen. And so I'm always glad to see people get it, finally. It's like a non-importance of Scripture, entertainment, experience is more important, and doctrine's not that important. So this is true. Barna came out with a research. I have not had time to read it. I just saw a couple of people referring to it this morning. And what it appears is that 15 to 25% of people that are in evangelical churches are really into occult practices, other spirits, and that sort of thing. It's pretty bad. I'll have to do that in an update. I did not have time to analyze it. Another area where we're being gaslit, of course, is in the area of climate change and global warming. And by the way, we know that there is, in Revelation, a period of global warming coming. It says everything gets burned up. It gets burned up during this last period of time. And then everything's remade, the elements are melted. But there's this report. This is the New York Times about a week ago. Scientists want to block sunlight to cool the earth. Now, what could go wrong with that, right? So there are, and I always say I'm all for global warming. If I'm fighting for a tea time in February at the golf course, I'm fine with that. I mean, we might lose part of Florida, but that's, I don't live there. But, and I'm just joking about that, by the way. But this is what they're talking about. There's another report just out this morning. You can find a good article about it at the Sociable blog that Tim Hinchcliffe maintains. And in fact, it's one of the ones I think you should bookmark and check on a regular basis. And they're talking about there's this group called, I think it's called ARIA in the UK, that has coming out with all these different ideas about how to cool the earth. They have a think tank, they have Zoom calls and all this other things where they're talking about it. And the problem is that they might get people that actually have enough money to back this to get this done. It's insane. And then this is from the Technology Quarter, The Economist watching the watchers about some of the development in technology and how data and everything's being used to track us, watch over us, predict what we do. And the AI movement is moving ahead rapidly. So I've been talking to some people that work in that industry, and it's concerning. They think that things are moving along much more quickly. There are also some reports coming out, I think this was in a Defense News publication, talking about using AI in fighter aircraft. So they took the Secretary of Defense out to, was it Brandenburg Air Force Base in California, and they flew him in a modified F-16. There was a modified F-16 that's flown by AI, and they went into a simulated dogfight between a piloted F-16 and an AI-piloted F-16. And this, remember, AI is still in the infancy. It was essentially a tie. Now, part of that might have been because of the physics and design of the aircraft, that the aircraft will break apart if you pull too many Gs, if you make too tight a turn and that type of thing. So human pilots know that because before the aircraft gets to that point, they feel like they're passing out and that sort of thing. But AI doesn't have that problem. And so what happens when AI is coupled with an aircraft design that allows the aircraft to do things that a human piloted aircraft just cannot do? And all of this stuff is changing the face of warfare. I mentioned this last week about some of these, for example, this is a Ukrainian guy working on some of the drones that they use. And you can see it looks like, so if you ever go to Best Buy and you can't find a drone, you might think, oh, well, Ukraine bought them all up. But it's interesting. I mean, and understand there are warehouses full of these things, and it's changed the face of warfare. So I was listening to a defense expert this week, and he was saying that in the past, a tank was a very good thing to use in warfare. But an Israeli tank costs $5 or $6 million. And until they modified the tank with some canopies now they were able to take a drone, maybe $2,000. They're able to take an RPG, maybe a couple $1,000s, and put it on a drone and drop it on top of a tank and destroy a tank. So $3,000 tank or a $3,000 weapon destroys a $6 million tank. And you can't keep up with that on an economic scale. this is part of the problem that's what's happening in Israel with regard to the potential conflict with Iran. Hezbollah is sitting over these, right now it appears that what Hezbollah has been firing over are mortars and rockets that are not really incredibly sophisticated. And they're doing this in droves, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on over there in Israel in a moment. But the big thing hasn't happened yet. I mean, I keep seeing I use a red alert app called Zofar, T-Z-O-F-A-R, sort of like shofar, T-Z-O-F-A-R. I think it's better than the other one. And so in the morning, sometimes I'll wake up and there'll be 20, 30, 40, 50 rockets, mortars, missiles, drones fired at northern Israel. And you always wonder, is this it? Are they really starting the whole thing? And there seems to be some design to what Hezbollah is doing. They fire over some rockets. Israel's fighting a multi-front war. They say it's a 7-front war. It's probably more like a 10-front war. So you have Gaza, you have Lebanon, you have Syria, you have the West Bank, you have the Houthis, you have Iraq, you have Iran, and then you have the information war, propaganda, newspapers, videos, Twitter, all this stuff. So it's a multi-front war. So what you'll see is you see these, and for some reason, I don't know why, I get all of these notifications on my Twitter feed from these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas lunatics. It may be because I'm stupid enough to pause on it and actually look at it, and then Twitter says, oh, you want to see more of that. And it just keeps building and building, and it seems like there's millions out there that are just rabid Jew haters, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinians, and I'm beginning to think it's true. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but there's this multi-front war. So the Twitter will take a bunch of rockets will be launched towards Israel. Israel will shoot down some and some will land. Some that land cause fires, some that land cause damage. And so all the pro-Hamas people and pro-Hezbollah people and Jew-hating, Israel-hating, anti-Zionist people say, oh, look, Iron Dome doesn't work. Well, because a rocket lands without being shot down doesn't mean that Iron Dome doesn't work, because what Iron Dome does is it analyzes the rocket trajectory and speed, and it calculates almost instantaneously where that's going to land. And they've got this in their system, okay, that's an open field. We don't have to worry about the rocket landing in an open field. We don't have to shoot off a $50,000 or $100,000 missile to knock down something that's not, it's going to blow up a pumpkin patch someplace or something. It's not worth it. But Hezbollah is shooting enough of these at military bases, installations, homes, and that sort of thing, that Israel has to respond with Iron Dome. And there's a concern that Iron Dome may eventually get depleted by defending against these things. And it takes time to replenish the Iron Dome missiles. Now, everybody is hopeful in Israel that there's this thing called Iron Beam, which is a laser system that really can, if it's made effective and deployed to where it can be effective, it can knock down these missiles, mortars, and that type of thing, mainly missiles and drones. And I'd say rockets, because it needs to be on the, it can't be extremely fast-moving missiles, because it has to create a certain heat buildup so it blows up the rocket. But anyway, it's still not ready for being rolled out. It's being tried, it's being field tested, but it can do it for the operation of electricity, the cost of the electricity to operate the laser, which is just literally dollars compared to thousands of dollars. So it'll be a great thing if it happens, but I'm not sure that it's there yet. But the face of warfare is changing dramatically. So you have it in drones, you have it in aircraft, you have it in missile technology. And Ukraine, I always get in trouble when I say anything about Ukraine and Russia, but Ukraine has, to some extent, punched above its weight class in its war with Russia. And listen, when this thing first started, all the pro-Russian guys were running around telling me, this is over in 2 weeks, right? It's been 2.5 years. So I would think that at some point, the people who were running around saying that, the Scott Ritters of the world and the Colonel McGregors and all these guys would say, hey, I was wrong. But they'll never do that. And so Ukraine, Ukraine's taken over some of Russian territory now. Now, I don't know that that'll last because Russia has a lot more people, a lot more manpower, and war eventually at the close-in level is going to be fought on a manpower level. But at least for right now, the technology and everything, and some of the AI developments by companies like Palantir and others have been able to help Ukraine quite a bit. So this was an article last week in the Wall Street Journal, I think I referenced it last week, about how these startup companies are developing tech and defense systems and maybe changing the face of warfare. So, okay, I don't want to talk about that one. So Ukraine did get into Russia, and it would move very quickly. It was secret. They didn't let anybody know about it, and they've taken over parts of Russian territory. And Russia is mad. How dare they invade us? Well, wait a minute. And then we get into all these arguments about whether Russia was justified in invading or not. And this is my observation. Putin runs around, and a bunch of other people run around saying, the West is weak militarily, the West can't respond, the West military is in terrible shape. So they talk about bringing Ukraine into NATO, which I don't think was going to happen, but Putin says, I have to invade because I'm fearful for our borders. Well, wait a minute. You just told us that the West was weak militarily and can't do anything. But rational thought doesn't really enter into many discussions these days. So I see some real inconsistencies in what Putin has said. And, maybe he was upset. Now we have a big fight again about who blew up Nord Stream. And I'll just remind people, the evidence seems to be that somebody from the West blew it up. But there were also financial reasons why Russia would do it. Now why would Russia do that? Because the Russian company was in contract for delivery. But if they couldn't deliver the gas, because Germany would not let them finish Nord Stream connection to Germany, they could have been sued for a lot of money, billions. But if there's a force majeure that happens, something happens to prevent Russia from fulfilling, the Russian company from fulfilling that contract. So there's a reason for that. I don't know if it's a strong reason, but I'm just saying again, it's one of these things that I don't think everybody wants their narrative, but nobody wants to consider anything that's against their narrative. I guess is the way that it goes. And maybe I do it because the law training, and maybe the law training really messed me up, but that's the way it is. So this is going to be kind of, I do want to talk about this. So we've seen the things about Title IX, and what the Biden administration did was they came in and they modified Title IX. Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. So the Biden administration came in and said that, what that really means, and what we're going to do is implement and enact regulations to say that sex there means gender identity. Now, that's been up through some appeals and that type of thing. And the courts have said, no. If you want that, there's a way to do that. You don't get to make it up, administrative agencies and executive agencies. You can only act within the scope of the authority that you're given by Congress and the legislation. Well, there's nothing in the legislation that gives them the authority to change the definitions of the words in the legislation. So the courts have said, if you want to change that, go back to the Congress and get the law changed. Very simple process. But they don't do that because why? Because they know they'll never get this nonsense through. So they try to do it by regulation, so they've been shot down, and now they came in, they've lost many, many times on this, and now they come to the Supreme Court. They want a stay of any injunction against the implementation of these regulations that change the definition of sex to include gender identity. And the Supreme Court said, now you would think that's a pretty easy decision for the Supreme Court, but it was a 5-4 decision. It was the 3 liberals, and I think Gorsuch ruled. I think they were willing to take the case, but it was a 5-4 decision that said, nope, you don't get to overturn the injunction. You can go through the appeal process and hearings and all that sort of things, but you don't get to do this. The injunction that prohibits you from implementing these regulations stands. And so here's what the court said. The Department of Education recently issued a new rule implementing Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. This is from the court's per curiam opinion, striking out the government's or denying the government's request. The rule newly defines sex discrimination to include discrimination on the basis of sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, pregnancy or related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And the Supremes have said, no, you can't do that. And so when it's presented in the media, though, they're gaslighting you again. They say, this is a headline from the New York Times or Washington Post, justices keep trans student protections on hold. But do you see what they just did there? They took what the government wanted to do and acted like, well, that was a good thing, so the court's bad, because the court upheld the law. Now, in the UK, some of these people have expressed views on social media. By the way, the UK right now is just completely lost in terms of free speech, in my opinion. Apology for postgraduate expelled over gender views. And that's great. He's been fighting this for years, and now he gets an apology. Man, you express views that the transgender ideology was not so good. There have been many scientific reports that have come out and said this, what they're doing is very, very bad for people. They changed how they were handling things in the UK. There's been places their legislation enacted in the United States. So this guy gets expelled over his gender views, and now he gets an apology. Isn't that wonderful? And what happened to his life in the meantime? So there's a big editorial today in the New York Times, 2 full pages in the opinion section of the New York Times this morning, just pushing the leftist nonsense that Kamala Harris wants to push on gender ideology, saying, boy, it's a shame that people aren't really giving this a fair hearing. But Johns Hopkins studied this for years, and they stopped doing these gender transition surgeries because they found out that it was very harmful. Suicide rate was, I think, 19 times higher in people that had this surgery performed than it was in people who did not. So that's the cultural front. And this is so when you look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, 2 Timothy chapter 4, and all these different passages about, people are going to be led astray. They're going to be given over to ideas that, well, for lack of a better term, tickle their ears. They're going to look for things they're going to try to hear what they want to hear. So here's just some stuff on the Ukraine-Russia thing. people in Russia, some of them are upset. And it's kind of, again, it's questionable how successful this is going to be in the long term. But in the short term, Ukraine comes in, they take over territory, they're killing people, they're having people killed. This has been a real meat grinder of war. But they were able to do this very quickly. And part of that is because of the technology and things that they're able to improvise on the fly. And Putin's mad. And he's making threats. There was some images of a fire at the cooling tower at the big nuclear power plant in Ukraine. And immediately Ukraine said Russia did it. Russia said Ukraine did it. Then Russia came out and said, well, Ukraine's going to put a dirty nuclear bomb someplace in Russia. Then Putin comes out and says, when people associated with Putin say, well, we're going to nuke the West. So, and maybe they are, I don't know. I mean, I have people who believe that that's coming in the very near term. I'm not a prophet. So it's back and forth. And then here's this thing on the Nord Stream pipeline. There's prosecution going on. By the way, China has tried to make this thing on the Belt and Road Initiative. This is talking about a railway that China built in Africa. And what's it say? All aboard Xi's railway to nowhere. Sort of sounds like what they want to build in California. They want to build high-speed rail out in the middle of the Central Valley that's not connected to really anything. A small town at the beginning, not much in between. My apologies to people who live in the Central Valley, very important part of the United States, by the way, in terms of food. And so what they show here is this little picture down at the lower left-hand corner. The high-speed rail ends in a field and then starts on the other side of the field. But without that connection, it's worthless, so that's why they call it the high-speed rail to nowhere. And this is true of a lot of Chinese projects. So this is an interesting article. This is a Jerusalem Post report of a political article. This relates to the Abraham Accords and what Mohammed bin Salman may or may not be doing with respect to that. So Mohammed bin Salman, if we go back to mid-September of last year, less than a year ago, you will find a very interesting, some things changed dramatically. Mohammed bin Salman went on Fox and he gave these interviews and said, hey, we're going to be doing this, we're going to change the face of the Middle East. A few days later, Benjamin Netanyahu went to the UN and said, this is going to change the face of the Middle East, what we're talking about. They've also talked about this transit corridor across Saudi Arabia and Israel to kind of get around the problem with the Houthis in the Red Sea and the Iranians. And things did change dramatically 2 weeks later. October 7th happened, and things have really not been the same since, and probably never will be the same again. I'm trying to remember. I have an Arabic article here, but I don't have the translation underneath, so I can't remember what it's about. There's a lot going on in the Eastern Mediterranean with regard to Israel's gas fields. The gas fields are very important to Israel. They help Israel get fresh water. The Middle East is in the midst of a major drought. There are things that are happening that prevent parts of the Middle East from getting water. For example, Turkey has built a series of rather large dams that dam the headwaters or the actual waters of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Those reservoirs are being filled up or are filled up, and while they're filled up, water's not flowing. Turkey could shut off the flow of water in the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. And so what's happening is farmers in Iraq that have lived for centuries in the Delta and farmed, they're near the Persian Gulf, there's no water coming through. I've talked about this many times in the past. Israel seems to have solved the water problem, but they have gas to power their desalination plants. Other countries in the Middle East, I think the most water scarce country in the world is Jordan. Egypt is having problems with water. Of course, the Ethiopians are filling up the dam. It's called GERD. And I think it's kind of ironic that great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, is also giving the Egyptian government a lot of heartburn. They're losing revenue from the lack of transportation through the Red Sea, and they're concerned about the flow of the Nile River, and about 90+% of Egyptians live in a very close proximity to the Nile River because the rest of the world, the rest of Egypt is a desert. And you may have learned growing up that things don't grow very well in the desert unless you irrigate. Well, Egypt is having massive economic problems, and there's some concerns that they could be on the verge of another revolution. And so our guy, Amos Hochstein, is running around the Middle East, and he's taking the template that he did for making Israel give away part of its claim to gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean, saying, well, just give land to the Hezbollah, Lebanon government, and we'll have peace in Lebanon. But that hasn't worked. I mean, there's a resolution been in place for 20-some years called Resolution 1701 that says no military force in southern Lebanon, and there's nobody to enforce that at all. But Amos Hochstein and our government say, well, we'll just give them more land and we'll have peace in the Middle East. We'll give them the Golan Heights back. We'll give them, just like we gave them the maritime thing. Now, the interesting part of that is the maritime dispute over gas fields gave Lebanon a cognizable claim to the gas and oil revenue from fields that really belong to Israel under international law. Lebanon has brought in companies to drill in that area. Every one of them has come up with what they got. Israel's drilling just across the maritime border and getting all kinds of gas and oil. But Lebanon drills, and all they get is sand and water. And of course, then the conspiracy theories start, well, these companies are being paid by the Zionists and the Jews to achieve this particular thing. So now the question is, and this has been the question that we've been faced for the last couple weeks, what's going to happen? So there's been all these predictions. My email inbox and Twitter feed was full of these predictions of the intelligence experts and the military experts saying Iran is going to attack Israel within the next 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, 2 weeks, over the assassination of Haniyeh and the Hezbollah head in number 2 guy in Beirut, Hamas number 2 guy in Gaza, and Haniyeh, the political head of Hamas in Tehran, right in an Iranian Revolutionary Guard compound. So everybody's like, oh, they're going to attack, it's going to happen. And now everybody in Israel is like, okay, when is this going to happen? We need to live our life. And you'll see a lot of pictures of Israel. There are people at the beach, they're shopping and that sort of thing. Because they don't know when it's going to happen, and they're not going to stop living their life based on the fact that Hezbollah and Iran may or may not do something. Now the question becomes, well, maybe what we should do is Israel should take the lead. Israel should do something bold. And so there's a tremendous debate internally in Israel about what Israel should do. And this is not too dissimilar from the debate that did not take place, but that should have taken place, because they had plenty of warnings about something going to happen in Gaza along the border, and everybody dismissed that. Or it was dismissed that, listen, we have technology in place, and we're trust our technology, and we're really good, and we'll see everything coming, but they didn't. So now the question is, okay, we missed it in Gaza. What do we do about Hezbollah in Lebanon? What are we missing? And it's a problem. So this week, Ben-Gvir, who is the interior minister, security minister for the Israeli government, and he falls in the right wing. He's Orthodox, he's religious, and of course that gets everybody upset. And so what Ben-Gvir did was he went up to the Temple Mount. And this gets the Arabs really upset. How dared you come up to the Temple Mount, even though I've showed you that publication many times. Their publication 100 years ago said that this being the site of Solomon's temple cannot be questioned. But then a narrative developed in the 60s that, well, the Jews really have no connection to the Temple Mount. And there are even Christians who feed into this by saying, well, no, the temple was in the city of David. And I like some of the people who have that view, but they're really wrong on that particular view, that the temple was down in the city of David. There's just not enough space for it. And every time I talk about it, I get all this, oh, you need to watch this video. I've watched all the videos, and you need to watch all the videos debunking that and talk to people who are archaeologists and that sort of thing. In fact, when I was in Israel in December of 2022, I was down in the city of David, and I asked one of the archaeologists there, was the temple, Solomon's temple or Herod's temple down here? And the guy looked at me like I'd grown another head while I was asking the question. He said, no, there's no evidence, there's no proof, there's no debris or anything like that. So what happened was Ben-Gvir goes up to the Temple Mount and walks around. And that day they had about 900 Jews went up to the Temple Mount and walked around. And of course, whenever that happens now, all of the Arab press says they're storming Al-Aqsa, they're going to destroy Al-Aqsa, when they're the ones who are shooting off fireworks and stuff up there and throwing rocks down on the thing. So here's a video of Ben-Gvir on the Temple Mount. And you can see how just utterly dangerous this is. First of all, here he...
באתי לכאן למקום הכי חשוב למדינת ישראל, לעם ישראל, כדי להתפלל על החטופות, על החטופים, שישובו הביתה.
And he's just saying, listen, this is our Temple Mount, we're coming up here. And he says the Jews should be able to come up here and to pray and to worship. And this is just, everybody's upset. Our government is upset enough that the State Department issued a thing saying, we think it was terrible what he did. Here's another video of him from the holiest place of the people of Israel, and which belongs only to the state of Israel. I say that tonight we will receive additional evidence why it is necessary to completely destroy Hamas. The countries that recognize today a Palestinian state are giving a reward to the murderers, to the kidnappers, to the persecutors, and I say that we will not allow any surrender. We will not allow any surrender that includes even a declaration of a Palestinian state. I say one more thing, that in order to destroy Hamas, We need to enter Rafah until the end to do a route, whatever. And we need to stop the process. We need to establish that it is humanitarian, only humanitarian, to control this place, the most important place. And if you are biblical, it's hard to argue with that. Now, I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. I have a few things that I want to talk about in the meantime. So, with regard to the Temple Mount, Yair Lapid, as this blogger or Twitter person says, Yair Lapid freaked out the whole country last year because religious zealots were going to enforce a theocratic halakhic state. And look at him now. What is Yair Lapid? He was the prime minister for a short time. He was the one who signed the maritime agreement that Amos Hochstein pushed down Israel's throat. And what has he done? He and another guy in the government have introduced legislation that would prohibit Jews from ascending the Temple Mount, which means that he's turning it over to the Muslims. So he's the one who's creating the religious supremacy over that particular area by banning Jews from their own Temple Mount. So this is a hugely divisive issue in Israel. Now, I mentioned water is a problem in the Middle East. This is an article from an Arabic newspaper published in London, Asharq al-Aswat, and excuse my Arabic. By the way, Pam and I were listening to guys talking about the involvement of Qatar in all of this situation in the Middle East. And everybody was saying the name of Qatar differently. So my view is, if you know what I'm talking about, mission accomplished. But here in the Middle East, this is a big article just published a couple days ago about how there is a lack of electricity, reliable electricity and power across the Middle East. Egypt has blackouts for hours a day. I'm not sure about Jordan. Iraq has blackouts, regular blackouts for hours a day. Now that seems it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that because Iraq has some of the largest oil reserves in the world, but they don't have reliable power. And that's a problem. And there's a lot of people that believe that the final Babylon is going to be rebuilt in Iraq, and that's fine, but there's a logistics issue. Nobody's going to invest there unless you have reliable power. And there's all these talks about investments, but if the power's not reliable, it's not going to work. Then one of the other countries they talk about in this article the other day is Lebanon. And this is a picture in Beirut. And what do you see there? A whole bunch of diesel generators. Why? Because Lebanon is probably, and has for years, had extremely unreliable power. And it's probably why Lebanon is really a failed state. So the Lebanese electricity company announced yesterday that Lebanon's electricity supply has been completely cut off in all Lebanese territories. And here's a picture of the announcement from the Lebanese electricity company. Jerusalem Post published it. They said, we tried to contact the Lebanon electricity company, but we couldn't get through because they don't have any power in Lebanon. But it's interesting, the wording of this, and I don't know, this is my thinking through the issue, because it seems that Hezbollah has power. And so what the electricity company says, announced that it's the supply of electricity on its behalf to the entire country, including essential facilities, has been stopped. This is after the last production unit at the Zahrani power plant in the south of the country was finished. The water company in South Lebanon said, we're not even sure we're going to be able to supply water to homes and businesses and hospitals and that sort of thing. They've cut off everything. The airport has no power. The port has no power, but this publication from the electricity company has this word that they forcibly ran out of power. Now, what does that mean exactly? It could mean that it just was a really bad thing that happened, but it could mean that somebody has taken all of their resources to generate power. And it appears that Hezbollah still has plenty of power in its facilities. So you can see some of these are pictures last night of the skyline of Beirut. Not much lights. Now, this week, Hezbollah revealed this massive underground tunnel network, and a lot of people have been dismissive of it, but I would say, were you dismissive of concerns about the tunnel network in Gaza? Were you dismissive of that? Then we probably should not listen to your opinion. So they did release a video. This is Ashaq al-Aswat newspaper. You can see the front page articles about it. Here are some things. The Islamic Resistance War Media published a segment titled, "Our Mountains Are Our Treasures," simulating the Ahmad 4 facility, and what it contains, numerous rocket launchers and military equipment. The striking thing is the size of the facility, its underground reach, and the messages it carries to the Israeli enemy that the resistance is ready for all possibilities. And then it has this phrase at the end of the article. This is from Al-Manar, that's Hezbollah's media and its propaganda, but the video is the video. And they say that this will be used from Kiryat Shimona to Eilat. And so that's the whole of Israel, from the north to Eilat there on the Red Sea. They intend, this is a facility they're going to use. Now, Israel's probably going to try to destroy it. And by the way, Israel, when it attacked the Houthi port down in Lebanon, or down in Yemen, and they destroyed it. It may take years for Yemen to rebuild that port to where it's effective. And you really haven't seen too much from Yemen since Israel did that. But that was a major military operation. That's much farther than F-35s can fly. They had to be refueled. Israel has a limited supply of tankers. They have more tankers on order from the United States. But those aren't going to be delivered for another 4 or 5 years. Because we need them in our Air Force, and we can't manufacture them quickly enough. And I don't know if Boeing's manufacturing them or not. That's not necessarily something that you would be comforted about. So that's about 1,200 miles. So they would have to be refueled. So it was a massive military operation that they were able to do this, fly down there, bomb the Yemen port, and get back home. They could modify an F-35 that it could get almost all the way there. But then it runs out of fuel, and planes without fuel don't fly very well. Now, the interesting thing is that when you look at this from the upper part of this, that it's further to Yemen than it is to facilities in Iran. And what Israel did in this attack was they sent a message to Tehran and the Ayatollahs and the IRGC, listen, we can get the Houthis, we can get you guys. And Iran has, and there's been attacks in Iran by Israel over the years, even with supposedly upgraded air defense systems. So back to this story about Hezbollah from Kiryat Shimona to Eilat. Good article by Seth Frantzman in today's Jerusalem Post. Missile tunnel video is a warning shot. And Seth has a new book out about October 7th that you probably should buy. He does an excellent job on that. So Hezbollah released a new video on Friday showcasing what appears to be a large tunnel complex where it keeps missiles. The facility is the size of a city and is not known where it begins, where it ends, and what it is connected to. It's probably up in the Beirut area. But you can see the size of this thing. So you'll see some trucks and Jeeps and that type of things. And one of the things you notice is that the tunnel system in Gaza had support beams and ceiling supports. This is drilled through bedrock. So in many respects, it doesn't need this. And so you'll see, and so Seth, who's a really good guy on Middle East security issues, he says, listen, this is a big deal. And Israel needs to think about this because whatever they had in Gaza is much stronger in Lebanon. They've been building these things for 40 years. And how do they destroy them and take them out? And so I think this is part of the reason for the delay. Some people think Israel may delay a year or two before they go into Lebanon. But then you have the problem. You have 80,000 people who lived in southern Lebanon who've had to leave their homes, pack up, and living out of suitcases in hotels across Israel or with friends. And for the what will now be the second year in a row when school starts in Israel in another month, their kids will not be in school. So, I mean, just those of you who have young children in school, what do you do with your kid when they're out of school for 2 years? This is a huge problem. And now the government has talked about, and security guys are talking about, it may be a year or two before Israel think it's really ready to go in there because they need massive munitions, they need massive support. The U.S. has come back and said, we'll help you out, and we're going to send you these things. We're going to send you more F-16s and some other things, and you'll get them around 2028. Well, that doesn't, the promise to deliver them in 2028 isn't much help. But look at the size of these things and how well constructed they are. See the trucks moving through there, they have missile launchers, they have that sort of thing. So Seth in his article says that this is a really, this is a big deal and Israel needs to deal with it. As he says, the new video shows a tunnel complex. It's not clear where it's located. The pro-Iranian media outlet Al Mayadeen describes the site as a sophisticated underground facility and an extensive tunnel network complete with missile launch pads. The tunnels are so large that trucks and vehicles can move through them. There are blast doors. The pro-Iranian report calls this a state-of-the-art technical system and a secure communication network that links it to the outside world, allowing it to receive launch orders within minutes. And this is similar to what they did down in Gaza. They went dark from the usual spy networks that Israel and other countries might use. They were doing things by paper, not by email. And so it made it very difficult. And then what they did in turn was they took, like in Gaza, they bought cell phone data so they could see how people moved through the kibbutzim and the military bases in southern Israel. And they could figure out which doors in a particular kibbutz were unlocked or where the secure rooms were. So they knew exactly where they were going. They had all this stuff on maps. So Seth said this is a big deal. Seth concludes with this. This is the point of the video. It is a shot across Israel's bow. Jerusalem has preferred to conduct precision and proportional responses to Hezbollah attacks over 10 months. Israel has evacuated some 60,000 people, including 14,000 children from the north. And so what has Hezbollah been able to do? All those people, 45 villages, towns across northern Israel, emptied out of people. And they're not, and you talk to the people, they're not going to go back. Some of them, 50% of them say we'll never go back. Well, that has an effect on the economy. They had businesses, they had that, schools and all that other thing. It's a huge problem. And so what Hezbollah has done is they've shrunken the size of the state of Israel, which isn't that big to begin with. And so a lot of people are now advocating. I think I've seen some interviews with Gadi Taub, who used to be a man on the left, now conservative, now a realist. What do they say? A leftist or a conservative is a leftist that got mugged or something like that. And so Gadi figured it out. Some great interviews with him this week on a number of channels. I played a clip of him interviewing that Haifa University professor last week. And he said, we got to figure this out. We got to do something. And we've got to start making it hurt in terms of territory. Now, my position has been, and I'm sure this would never get through anybody and it's easy for me to do it because I live here in America, but so for every town that they evacuate, every acre that they evacuate in the north because of Hezbollah and Iran, they ought to take that amount, about 10 times that amount of territory out of the West Bank and Judea and Samaria and make settlements there. Because until they start losing territory, they're never going to get to it. But boy, you talk about just having Jews walk on the Temple Mount and everybody loses their mind. But they have to do something. They have to win. They have to be victorious. And they have to humiliate these people. And they're doing a good job in Gaza, for example. This is a drone footage of some 50, you can sort of see the flashes here, 50 Hamas tunnels being destroyed in Gaza by the IDF the other day. So Gaza Strip's 40 some miles north to south. I mean, can you imagine, the munitions that it would take to destroy that? And then you look at places in the north. I saw somebody driving through a street in Gaza in the north. It's destroyed. There's no buildings left. People are advocating that Israel needs to do that to Lebanon all the way to Beirut, at a minimum, because they have to restore security. Because if you want those people to return, where they lived before, you can see the Hezbollah guys right across the border. I mean, it's 100 yards. Now, if you move them back 10 miles and they still have rockets and missiles, are you going to feel any more comfortable? I don't think so. So it's a huge problem. Israel's making massive preparations. This is a practicing refueling by Israeli aircraft. And so, by the way, they put up these videos because they're showing Iran, listen, we're ready, we're going to do this. At the same token, by the same token, the United States is moving massive amounts of naval vessels and equipment into Israel. Here, it is now estimated that by the time everything gets there, a lot of it's on its way. Submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, support ships. About 30% of all naval assets will be somewhere around the Middle East. Now, I believe that the U.S. order of battle plan is that one aircraft carrier could take out a small country. So we're moving a lot of assets into the area to show that we mean business. But I don't think we understand what we're facing. Here's a few videos. For example, here's one of some Hamas guys of this is what they think. Everybody thinks, well, we'll let them have the Temple Mount. We'll let them have part of Judea, Samaria. We'll let them alone in Lebanon, and everything will be fine, right? And it's a pipe dream. Look at what these guys say. They say, our issue is not just Palestine. Our issue is killing every non-Muslim. We will pursue Jews and Christians all over the world. Either they convert to Islam or we'll kill them. So put that in the context of everybody worried about Islamophobia in the UK right now and putting people in prison. A 15-year-old kid. I mean, the protests have been ongoing over the last 2 weeks. There are many people already in prison serving 3-4 years. That's a speedy trial response unlike anything we've ever seen. I mean, look at some of the cases in the United States that drag on for years and years. By God, if we chase the Jews from Palestine and the Holy Temple, and they don't surrender to Islam, even if they go to the end of the world, we shall chase them and kill them. And then we will call the Christians to convert to Islam because this is the only religion of compassion. I know, but listen, we do not understand what the mentality is. And look, when you go into Judea, Samaria, 75 to 80% of the people, maybe even more, 85%, support Hamas. They want Hamas to have control. And as this security guy, Dr. Malouf, on Twitter says, Tokyo is the largest and most populated city in the world, and there's a picture of Tokyo and its suburbs. 40 million people, zero Islamic terrorism. Why? Because they control their borders. They don't let them in. We seem to have a problem with that. And we had a border czar, although now she's not the border czar. You know, I never had anything to do with it. I just had a meeting, and I've never been to France either, she says. And then here's a video. This is not Gaza. This is London. Muslims warn the entire Jewish community in Britain that their turn to be beheaded as a human sacrifice for Allah's sake is coming soon. This is Liza Rosen. As you can see in the video, the Muslims chanted in Arabic, Khaybar, Khaybar, Yahud, Jasad Muhammad. Translation, Jews, remember Khaybar, the army of Muhammad is coming to kill you too. And by the way, are these guys in prison for what they said? No, people who posted things about this are subject to being put in prison. And by the way, the Israeli police or the British police guy says, and if you do it in America about what's going on in London, we'll come and we'll try to do it. Now listen, I'm against violence all around, just let that be clear. But we need to speak the truth about this. So here's a video of the Muslim mayor of London and the current Prime Minister, Starmer, of the UK, talking about this issue a few months ago as it was starting to come to light. And look at what they're concerned about.
One of the things that is coming up over and over again is Islamophobia. And well, you can see the stats, you can see the numbers rising, particularly since October the 7th. Although we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that before October the 7th, this was all heading in the right direction. It's been far too high for far too long. Clearly, we need to just say over and over again, Islamophobia is intolerable. It can never, ever be justified. And we have to continue with a zero tolerance approach. And I think there's more we can do in government. There's certainly stuff online which I think needs tackling much more robustly than it is at the moment.
What I'm hoping, Claire, is your experience as a prosecutor means you'll be thinking about the strategy we can use to make sure we take action against those who break the law.
So, guys on the left, no problem. People who can say something about the guys on the left, you're going to jail. It's really unbelievable. Now, Abbas this week, Mahmoud Abbas, went to Ankara and spoke in front of the Turkish parliament. Let me see if I can pull that up. And of course, my search, there it is. Palestinian President Mohammed Abbas went to Turkey, spoke in front of the parliament, and he said this. He prayed for the soul of the martyr Ismail Hania in a speech before the Turkish parliament. They didn't get along, by the way. And he added, America is the plague, and the plague is America. I will go to the Gaza Strip, and from there to Jerusalem, we are implementing Sharia law, victory or martyrdom. And he got big applause in the Turkish parliament from the people there. By the way, It's interesting. The one thing I looked at this picture, Erdogan is 2 days younger than I am. And the one thing I noticed there is the joy that they had at meeting. And look how happy they are. So, and look, this is pictures in the Turkish parliament. Sinwar and Hania, pictures being held, and all the Palestinian keffiyehs being worn. Erdogan also welcomed the Emir of Qatar. And remember, I showed you pictures of him at the funeral of Hania in Qatar last week. Qatar is a terror operation on every level. They're sending millions and millions of dollars to the United States. There's only 300 Qatari citizens in the world, but they control the largest gas field in the world with Iran. And by the way, they're Shia, or they're Sunni. Iran is Shia, but they cooperate when there's money involved, and they're funding things against Israel. Erdogan, by the way, in some recent talks that he gave within the last 2 weeks, he has recapitulated the idea of what has been called Turkey's blue homeland. And you see what they're doing is they're continue to expand what they consider to be their claim to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean and the Aegean. And they're using this they're weaponizing this. They even had an economic zone that they had over to Libya to block Israel's proposed pipeline to Europe, but we didn't have to worry about that because our government went into it. Now, here's a couple guys talking about, and I think this is a very good summary of the problem with Islam.
Hamas went into Israel that day knowing they can't beat the IDF. They went in that day knowing that the IDF would come after the hostages. They went in that day knowing that they were going to use their own civilians on top of legitimate military targets in an effort to increase civilian casualties, their civilian casualties. And yet, they knew that Western media and academia would back their play and make a false moral equivalency argument. The question that you got to start asking yourself, if you're serious about this, how did they know they could trust left-wing academia and media to back their play? How did they know? Because that's exactly what took place.
So that's why you need to follow guys like Trevor Loudon, go to the RAIR Foundation, RAIR Foundation. I think I've linked in prior podcasts or videos to Trevor Loudon's talk. Fantastic video that he did at the RAIR Foundation. It's on Rumble. And he's written a lot extensively about the Red-Green Alliance, the Communist Marxist Alliance, and they just seem to work together so naturally. By the way, Caroline Glick has a great interview with a Jewish academic this week about how did this come about? How did the communists join up with the Muslims? She traces it back to the before the 60s, but really became intensive in the 60s by the Soviet Union, Russia, KGB. It was a psyop that they said, Jews didn't have any claim to the Temple Mount. The Palestinians were a real people. That all came about in 1964. That was all Russia. And so I'm troubled by all the pro-Russian things. I don't have time to play it.
Is the Palestinian crisis a land dispute, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so at all. It's a religious issue, and I asked it's mainly when you see the whole Palestinian issue, their problem is they don't want Jews to survive there. So if all Jews became Muslims one day, they will have no problem with that. So the issue with them is Jews. I asked one day a friend of mine, if all Jews converted to Islam, in Israel, will you still have this fight and trouble? He said, of course not. I said to him, then this is not a problem of the land. It's a problem just because they are Jews. So, and when you listen to the Arab media, when you follow the Arab media, when you follow the people who are, it's all about a religious war against the Jews. And they wanted to take it further to apply the prophecies that Muslims will slaughter and kill every Jew in the world. This is one of the prophecies in some book called Al-Bukhari. It's not in the Quran, but it's in a book called Al-Bukhari that's well respected by many.
And so this is the problem. So again, just to recap, Israel's facing all of these 7, 8, 9, 10 front war. I don't have time to go into that. I want to talk about Psalm 83 in the future, because I think this plays into it, because there's a big article today and this is a world map, sort of a historical map. So at the time of Asaph, who was the seer or prophet who wrote Psalm 83, you can read about that in 2 Chronicles, read about him in 2 Chronicles, at the time of David and Solomon. So back about 950 BC roughly, probably is when he wrote Psalm 83. And so this is what the world looked like back then. So when he talks about Assyria, now you know where Assyria is. When he talks about Tyre and Sidon and that sort of thing, you can zoom in on these maps at the world history maps, and you can see where they are. And then there's a prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 28 that need to be looked at. And I'll finish with this. I have two more things, I'm sorry. This is from the Tehran Times today. Europe is planning Abraham Accords 2. And Britain and France and Germany want to achieve peace with everybody, but they want to use the vehicle of the Abraham Accords to accomplish that, which seems to tie into Psalm 83. The nations identified in Psalm 83. And then this, so this is Palestinian Media Watch, Itamar Marcus, talking about Candace Owens, and I like the fact that I think he misspelled Candace, which I applaud if that was intentional. You know who Candace Owens is. She used to be with Daily Wire. She has completely lost her mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play what she said. I think I took out all the F-bombs. I watched her video. It's F-bombs all over the place, but I think this part doesn't have any F-bombs. I mean, I'm a great Catholic Christian, and she's always posting Christ as King. I'm not sure what she means. I don't think she really means it in the way that we think it should be taken. But listen to this, what she's talking about on her podcast in her office the other day. Listen to this.
Many moons ago, before they decided to establish Israel as a country, I know you've read like the short version in the classroom, and it was like, oh, the Holocaust happened, and then we realized that Israel needs a state. No, that's not how it went down. That's not how it went down at the F all, okay? Catholics and Christians were going missing on Passover, and then they would find bodies, okay, across Europe, and they were able to trace them back to Jews. Blood libel. They weren't Jews, okay? These were Frankists. And so just like Leo Frank killed Mary Fagan on Passover back in 1913 or 1914, I can't remember the exact date, he did it during Passover for a reason. This Frankist cult, which is masquerading behind Jews, still participates in this shit to this day, okay? Why would you want, as a small nation that is the size of New Jersey, okay, why would you want the pedophiles to flee there? Like, why would you want the pedophiles to be procreating?
Okay, I can only take so much of her anymore. My friend Dumasami, Washington, who I interviewed about Tucker Carlson, he said something about Candace. I'm not even going to go on her show because it's a waste of my time to try to reason with, I'll paraphrase what he said, an insane person. She's propagating the lies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a Russian propaganda thing made up in the late 19th century. It's unbelievable the stuff that she went on and she said about Jews. And she's on this kick. She interviewed this week, she was talking about Jews want to have sexual relations with underage kids. And she made that in an interview of Andrew Tate, who's been charged with that in Romania. She's sitting on an easy chair interviewing him and railing about the Jews. And she's this great, and people view her as this great Christian. But the point of this video, this is Palestinian Media Watch, of a Islamic imam at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And so the point of Palestinian Media Watch posting this is, you can't determine a difference between what this guy said in a mosque in 2015 and what Candace Owens is saying on her podcast today. But the problem is, a lot of people on the right wing in our country, they've determined it's okay to attack Jews like this. And it's a huge problem. It is a huge, huge problem, in my opinion, and it's growing, and it's growing across the political world. And Tablet magazine back 12 years ago wrote an article about it, about the same thing happening in Hungary. And by the way, she mentioned this Frankist, there's actually a New York Times article in 1883, I looked it up this morning, published that talked about a trial in Hungary where somebody was accused of a Jewish boy was accused of killing Catholic girls. And they wanted to lynch the guy. Why? Because of stuff like Candace Owens says. That's what she's trying to instigate. She can deny it, but I'm just telling you, it certainly appears that she's headed that way. And prove me wrong, but I'm just shocked. Can I finish with a couple-minute clip? We talk about this as a Temple Institute picture of what they hope to accomplish. And I know all the arguments about the temple and all that other stuff. Here's Ari Abramowitz, because they were talking about Israel's going to be attacked by Iran on the 9th of Av. Remember? Just this last week, last Monday, Tuesday. And so, look, Ari's an Orthodox Jew, friend of Jeremy Gimpel, who we had here at church many, many years ago. And so this is on Jeremy Gimpel's Twitter feed. Jeremy was in a pretty serious horse riding accident. I just want you to listen to him because I think he puts into context the 9th of Av and how a lot of Orthodox Jews are viewing it. Here we go.
Reports are coming in that Iran is planning to launch their attack on the 9th of Av. Now, while no one knows anything definitively, and as always, rumors are always flying, it's important to know your enemy. I mean, to truly know your enemy. The name Iran comes from the word Aryan, but for most of history, modern-day Iran was known as the ancient nation of Persia. And they're a religious country. Very religious. Yes, it's a dark spirituality focused on hatred and death, but they have a long history of choosing what they believe is auspicious timing for the downfall of their enemies, particularly the object of their most pathological obsession, the Jews. I mean, this goes back nearly 2,500 years to when Haman chose the Hebrew month of Adar to implement his genocidal attack, believing that Adar was a month of poor tidings for the Jewish people. And so it's no coincidence that Iran has chosen the month of Av, perhaps even the 9th of Av, as reports are showing, the time of greatest darkness and tragedy in Jewish history, to launch their campaign of annihilation against Israel. But just like Haman before them, the Ayatollahs don't see the whole picture. They don't know the ancient Jewish tradition that the month of Av will one day become a time of great joy and celebration. As the prophet Zechariah foretold, that the day shall come when the fast of the 5th month, meaning the 9th of Av, shall be to the house of Judah a time of joy and gladness and good times. Iran doesn't know the 1,000-year-old tradition that the Mashiach himself, the Messiah himself, will be born on the 9th of Av, meaning that salvation itself will emanate from that day. That's right. What the Ayatollahs don't realize is that the genocide they're planning against us will be the catalyst of our redemption. And just as Haman was hung on the very gallows he erected for Mordechai, their murderous plot will be their own undoing. There are even Jews who to this very day, I just met one this morning, on the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, during the morning itself, they light the Ner Mashiach, the candle of Mashiach, and decorate their homes with rugs and flowers and preparation in expectation of the redemption that will one day take place on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. Now you can write me off as a crazy chicken farmer in Judea, but I believe we are finally there. And just as Simchat Torah this year became Tisha B'Av with grief, Tisha B'Av this year will become Simchat Torah with joy. So stay strong, my friends, and if the Spirit moves you, take out your guitars, violins, tambourines, whatever. Prepare for the celebration, because a miracle beyond anything we can imagine is on its way. All we have to do is keep our hearts and our faith where they belong, keep our eyes where they belong, gazing with hopeful expectation at the God of our fathers, the God of Israel, creator of heaven and earth. Shalom from Judea.
So listen, I don't agree with all of this theology. I want that to be understood. But what I'm seeing is there's this yearning. And so my hope and prayer is that we can redirect that in the right way. They're looking for this. Now, you have to factor in what Jesus told us about deception in the end times. But, the promise is a lot will get it. And we're just getting ready to start Romans. We just started Romans, or getting ready to start Romans chapter 11 and during the sermon part of our service. And that's a great promise. And I'm not sure exactly how it all works out. I do know it works out that way because that's what the prophets prophesied. So pray for the peace of Jerusalem, which really means pray that Messiah will come and rule and reign. And the true Messiah. And that people come to faith and knowledge in him. Let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Thank you for allowing us to live at this great time of human history. Pray that you'll keep us focused on you, the author and finisher of our faith. Give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us, and bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.